Tēnā no tātou I te āhuatanga whakaeke e nāia nei I te mihi rangatira. E tātou mai, e tae mai whakarongo ngā kōrero I te pōnei. Nō reira, ka nui te mihi kia koutou I tae mai ngā mana wahine no Terra Australis o Australia. Ka nui te mihi, ka nui te mihi. Tihewa Māori ora, ko imi te maunga whangaro te awa mā tātua te waka tapu ingoa called Bryce Smith. Kia ora tātou everybody. We're here this evening having discussions from a contact with members from Australia, and they have questions regarding He Wakaputanga and the Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And we're here to work through some of the questions and work through some of the answers this evening. Nō reira, tēnā no tātou katoa.
Thank you, Bryce.
Kia ora.
We have some questions just in regard to the Proclamation of Independence document. If you can let us know what the He Wakaputanga is.
Kia ora. In my opinion, the He Wakaputanga o te rangatiratanga document is based around philosophies, systems and processes that derive from our creation as tangata whenua Māori. Reverting back to, if I can, Ranginui and Papatuanuku, or Earth Mother and Sky Father, and all of the sequences of events that happened during that time before Tāne Mahuta made Hiniahone to bring in a new time for us as tangata whenua Māori, and all of those specific events that happened. Kia ora.
Where did it come from specifically? Like, what is the source of it?
Right. Again, the source of the kupu within the document, each kupu on the 1835 document, from a cultural perspective, are sourced from events that happened in that time that we're talking about. If I can give a name to that time, I'm going to say the Rangituhaha. During the time of the development of the solar system and its placements of all the planets around the sun, and then when Tāne Nuiarangi made Hiniahone, the first maternal, the time name changed to Te Aoturo, which allowed us to evolve and create our existence here in Aotearoa specifically, or more to the point in the Moana Nui a Kiwa or the Pacific. So the source of the document are based on tikanga, recorded events from those times.
That's amazing.
Why is the document so powerful? The first I heard about it was at the end of last year, surprisingly, and it was touted to me as a document that was the gateway for everybody's, inverted commas, sovereignty in the world.
Kia ora. I do understand that thought on when hope is needed. Now, I'll say the power, or translate the mana of the document, comes from a divine source. If I can really enhance that, it comes from a divine source which creates the suggestion that it has a power. The divine source for this discussion has a tendency to indicate in the recognition of the world of the 1835 document and the recognition of the world prior to that 1835 document, where we as tangata whenua were trading around the world with nations. And there was a moment in time where our recognition didn't exist, and recognition came very swiftly with a kara or a flag and the 1835 document. The suggestion of divine power, right, gives very, very strong connotations that the divine power has a jurisdiction to allocate sovereignty. And in my opinion, and through discussion and through debate, we can find with discussions with the elders over many, many years that the 1835 document recognised tangata whenua Māori, or specifically those that put their names to that document, as having that divine authority, and came along in 1840 when Te Tiriti o Waitangi came about, that the divine authority was applied and sovereignty was allocated to a group of people that were known at that time as settlers, who had no standing in any system. They were simply called settlers. They had no heritage, they had no culture, and tangata whenua Māori, through their cultural practice of manaki and pōwhiri, to comfort those people and to give them a heritage, and to, more importantly, give them a standing within the global scene of allocating them sovereignty and allowing themselves to be called New Zealanders.
So does that mean that white people and black people are supported together in that document? Pākehā?
I think yes, I understand. I think one of the unique things about our culture here in Aotearoa is, if we go to the 1840 document, for an example, in Article 4, my ancestors were very appropriate in the decisions that they made. They were made fluently and with robust research. But in our culture, a visitor that comes from another place is called a hungake. And when they get to our shores, there's protocols that we apply. Pōwhiri, we invite them into our whare, and we make them us if they're going to stay. So the simple story, if I can say, on that philosophy that I don't believe anyone has an ability to change, is when my waka mātātua arrived here in Aotearoa, we were a foreigner from another land, or a stranger from another land, just for the sake of explanation. When we got here, we were welcomed onto the shores as manuhiri. And as the new generation evolved or were created, it's been said that the afterbirth from the birth of their child, when it's placed in the land or in the whenua called Aotearoa, that living person became tangata whenua. Now, if I can give perspective to the kupu Pākehā, all right, in 1769, it's recorded that a Pākehā vessel arrived on the shores. They went through the same process that I did on our waka called Mātātua. And those people became Pākehā, people of this land, tangata whenua, if I can say it like that. And to conclude, there's only one place in this entire universe where you'll find a Pākehā, and that's standing next to a Māori here in Aotearoa. Kia ora.
That's amazing. So how does it actually apply to Australia? How does that cross over and apply to Australia, Terra Australis?
Thank you for that. Yes, in my opinion, to get that connection, I would strongly recommend that a cultural connection needs to be made, that whakapapa, I guess. So I have two examples that I'd like to share where that whakapapa does exist. There was a point in time, and this is talking with the Aborigine people. They talk about tangata whenua Māori as being the younger brother in their history, and the younger brother was sent out into the Pacific to go forth and create and evolve, if I can use that word evolve very, very kindly. And the older brother, called the Aborigine, stayed in Australia, or Terra Australis, and they stayed in the systems and processes and practices that they've always had. In a short explanation, they didn't evolve. They stayed exactly as they are today, and they've always been the same. And we went out and did what we did over the tens, or if not hundreds of thousands of years. So I'm very appreciative as an individual, tangata whenua Māori, having an older brother that I can refer to as having the original source of the rangituhaha world. where they have dream time and they go walkabout and they still practice those ancient philosophies and methods. Without them, in my opinion, we would have lost our source. If I can say that, there's a connection that we have that can easily connect us to this 1835 document and encourage, because we're brothers. It's as simple as that. Now, another matter I would like to bring up as another connection to get to this document together is the story I heard from a gentleman in Australia named Mabo, and we're all familiar with Mabo. And Mabo he made the same statement, I think, from the same question. How do you connect to this land? And he talked about Malo being an individual at that time that came from somewhere. I'm not going to predict or dictate where he came from. But when he arrived in Terra Australis, he left laws behind. And two of the particular laws that he left behind, the first one was simply, my hands will not touch what is not mine. And the second law that he left was, my feet will not walk in a place that I don't belong to. Now, the conclusion of breaching those two laws was very, very simple. And I'll quote Mabo. He said, if you breach those two laws, you will simply die. So in saying that, the third event that Malo did, Malo then turned into an octopus, or what we call a wheke. When Kupe came from Aotearoa, said to be the first voyager to get here, it said that Kupe in the myth and legend was chased by an octopus or a wheke. But we know the antithesis of the Western world's history, that wheke is in fact a spiritual pathway when our spirits leave our human living bodies and they begin a journey. In Aotearoa, we have a place called Te Rerenga Wairua at the tail of the fish, where our spirits go up Te Oneroa Tohe, 90 Mile Beach, we get to a putakawa tree, and so on, and so on, and so on, and end up at a place called Te Whare Hinenui Te Po. Now, we follow that tentacle to the head of that octopus. And at the head of that octopus, there's an island that's well known in the Pacific where there's a 3-petal flower. And that 3-petal flower, we have a waiata for that 3-petal flower. And it's been seen that every time a spirit arrives on that island from those 8 points within the Pacific of each of those tentacles, that flower breaks off its stem and floats into the sky, acknowledging the arrival of a spirit from within the Moana Nui Kiwa Pacific area. Kapai. Very important, those connections. And that will get us to, collectively, I can't deny my older brother access to He Wakaputanga. I would like to make the strong suggestion that the dialect that the document is written in the younger brother dialect. If the older brother chooses to enjoy the pleasures of this document, of the allocator world, or the divine world that they exist in already, my strong suggestion would be to translate that into their dialect.
And how would they do that? What would be the first step if someone was called to do that, or a tribe was called to do that?
Okay, that would, in my opinion, is a very simple process. I'm going to make the statement that the dialect of the He Wakaputanga o Te Rangatira Tanga document that was done in 1835 is already written in a divine dialect, or I'm going to say the Rangituhaha dialect, before humans arrived. That dialect of our environment, of the wind talking to the trees, and the trees talking to the ocean, and the ocean talking to the fish, and so on and so on and so on. That dialect, in my knowledge, is called the Rangituhaha. And the dialect that I understand, that when we left our big brother, the Aborigine people were existent in that dialect as it is now since then. That would be very simple to do. We would, in a contemporary explanation, it would be nice to sit down with some spiritual leaders from Australia. We give our version of the Rangituhaha explanation of this document, and applying the source of each one of those kupu so that there's a full understanding, and they can acquire that same systems and processes and philosophies and use their kupu or their language to put onto that document.
How would they find you at Kaeo office? Reach out to Kaeo office for that
Yes,
request?
definitely.
And what has the successes been for the document in Aotearoa, or New Zealand, as the corporation has named it?
Right. Well, immediately the first success of this 1835 document and the context on how it's written, if I can say it like that. It's been mentioned before that many intellectuals have attempted to disseminate this document, and it hasn't been easy. And that's been identified. So for the disseminating of the document is very important, because in the document it talks about a process on the next step if it's chosen, and that shows up in Article 3. And in Article 3 it talks about a particular group, not Te Wakamininga, right? This is the Runanga. I'll use the English explanation. The Runanga will meet in Congress at Waitangi each year to frame laws for peace, justice, goodwill, and trade, right? Now, until we have this discussion, what we'll find is that process was used, and I'm going to say religiously, and what was born from it, that process, 5 years later, in 1840, was a document called Te Treaty o Waitangi, where we as, and I'll be a little bit cynical here, being labelled as savages at the time, we negotiated with one of the mightiest military forces on the planet at our choosing. And I say that in all honesty, because we had the French Revolution going on at the same time. They were knocking on our door. Can we hook up with you? Because you're an allocator. And we said, well, you guys are squabbling amongst yourselves, so we can't really do that. The Americans were here with their revolution. You guys are squabbling, so we can't do that. So it's in the history of the Tuku corridor, that's held in Marae, was that at the time England was suffering. Its industry was suffering badly, basically needing oil to run their industries. So we went with them as a simple, and also because they had the many ports of trading around the world at the time, which we delved into also and enjoyed. So that's two pleasures. If I can, there's another pleasure of using the mana of this document, and that was when the settler government in here had a constitution, and they called it the 1852 Settlers Constitution. Now, at a point in time, the settlers were misbehaving, and the Queen or the monarch at the time was still their jurisdiction. So, and I want to just point this out, because I haven't seen this being done anywhere else on the planet, where our ancestors here got together through a petition, and they petitioned the Queen, basically saying, your settlers are playing up. We need you to manage them, right? Because that's what the document said. You would manage them. And what the Queen did, she inserted what's called an Imperial Act into the New Zealand Constitution, right? Settlers Constitution. Now, look at this perspective. We had an allocator from Aotearoa give instructions to a sovereign called the Queen, and she inserted an Imperial Act into another government's constitution. That's never been seen. So there's another pleasure, if I can say, of the authority, the jurisdiction, and the power of that 1835 document in there, and how it's to be used.
Didn't they try to take that Imperial Act out of there?
Yeah, there was an occasion when the government wanted to make an amendment. You can't amend the Constitution; you have to replace it, remove and replace. When that attempt happened, the government had to return back to Aotearoa with the Imperial Act, so they weren't able to replace the Constitution or the 1852 settler government constitution. So they were unconstitutionalized for a short time. And then they went into a process of registering on the New York Stock Exchange as Her Majesty the Queen and Right of New Zealand. And so they became constituted under that process, under that stock exchange company's office, or whatever you want to call it. But the fact of the matter, or the point I want to make here, because the 1835 document still exists and the processes that were used to draw that document up, and then the 1840 document, which was born from the 1835 document, and then the 1852 Imperial Acts that were inserted into the settler constitution, all still exist. If you remove one, you have to remove them all. And no one's been able to do that.
Can I ask, Bryce? We have, in order to go through this process with the tribal nations of Terra Australis, would they need to be unified, or can only, if anyone steps forward, you can go through that process, or do you need the collective in general? Because we have a division in Australia between what we know as the original tribes that live in the same way that they always have done throughout history, and then what's called the stolen generations, and then those that have some form of DNA lineage. And the one lot doesn't like the other lot because they don't think they're real, and the other lot feels disenfranchised because they want roots, connect to their roots and connections. And there's this huge disunity at the moment. So how would it work to work with this document in light of what's going on at the moment?
Kia ora, that's another relevant question. In the structure, it's in the structure, if I can say it like that, the structure of the 1835 document. Let's delve into numerical symbols here. There's only 30 odd signatures on the He Wakaputanga o Te Rangatiratanga. So, and look at the trouble it's caused globally. Now, we have to stop and ask the question, why so little signatures? So that is a structure. So within the 1840 document, I'm just going to suggest that to do the 1835 document is not going to be difficult. Okay, we need those spiritual lawmakers only, and that's a structure. Those are positions within a tribal structure. Now, when that 1835 document is done to unite all the appropriate, if I can say, what appears to be dysfunction or division or that kind of behavior, is to develop an 1840 document, because that's what brought everybody here together, that using that same process of getting the spiritual leaders only on the 1835 document, and I'm just going to use this word for explanation, they're only spiritual leaders, right, from the Rangituhaha world. When you talk about the tribes, that's the Te Aotearoa world, which involves the 1840 document. So one needs to be done first, and the unifying document, what we call here is the Te Tiriti o Waitangi, needs to be done next.
Because this brings up another question. In this disunity and division that's going on at the moment, there's this element that's talking about sovereignty and saying that only the original tribes have sovereignty over the land and no one else has sovereignty. And then you've got another group talking about sovereign citizenship, and there's all sorts of different sort of perspectives going on at the moment. Can you elaborate on sovereignty for us,
Right.
please?
I understand. Look, the division is appropriate, and I say it like that. In the north here, in the northern tribe of Aotearoa, we have a tribe called Ngāpuhi. And one of the explanation of who is Ngāpuhi, they say Ngāpuhi Tani Whāro, the place of 100 taniwha, or the place of 100 chiefs. From an outsider looking in who doesn't understand that structure, it looks dysfunctional, right? But all we're talking about here, we're talking about different people that carry different pieces of a puzzle to make a full picture. Like 1835, and I'll use this just as an explanation, God help everybody when those 100 chiefs come together. That is not something we want to happen, right? Because while they're not together, they look dysfunctional. But when they come together, and I'll return the favor to a good friend of mine named Satan. All hell will break loose if they do come together. So I don't believe that those elders in Australia, those spiritual leaders, will find it difficult to come together. Just as a perspective, Karen, there is a spiritual leader on the trees, there is a spiritual leader on the water, there's a spiritual leader on the sky, there's a spiritual leader on the wood, there's another one on the birds. So they're representatives of the entire environment, if you can understand that. And that's the same concept that's applied here in the 1835 document. Each one of those tohu on that document represented a specific part of the source, what we talked about earlier. The source is simply the environment itself.
Right. So the intimation here is that the most senior spiritual leaders need only be on the same page to create enough of a basis to create this work between us.
Yes, there's another cliche here in the north. The ariki only come out of their houses when there's something wrong, right? Now, there's a specific way to approach them for them to come out. And a simple delivery would be, our environment is in despair. Speak of the environment as a human being. We used to say tangaro, or our ocean, is in ICU, and the doctor's asking the family to pull the plug. I mean, that gets everybody stimulated. Now, regarding the sovereignty matter, I'll talk about the allocator situation of 1835, where we were recognised as allocators of sovereignty. Karen, and in 1840, we allocated sovereignty to a group of people. For myself and others that I was trained by, to call them a sovereign it was like calling them food, right? Because when you are called food, that's the most disrespectful thing you can say. And sovereignty does the same thing. Right. And so, to be very clear, if you were to ask me, what is a sovereign in your opinion? And I would say, I can reference a sovereign as being a slave, because there is someone gave it to them, another human. All right.
Yeah. Because there is part of this unity that's going on, is this element that believe that sovereignty means you own the land and have rights to the land and the continent, and everyone else doesn't and needs to just go away. And that's causing problems between all these different elements at the moment.
Yes, I totally understand that. What I'd like to suggest is, often and quite occasion, people, and no disrespect to them, just to point out a point, people get the line between tikanga, or ancient law, and today's LAW, the line between them gets blurred. All right? It gets very, very blurred. And it's nobody's fault that we start by saying tikanga and then we jump over to LAW. It's because the culture has been abandoned, and the culture doesn't have its systems anymore. They are there, but they're not being used. Yes.
I'd also like to add, I have heard that what you were talking about, where the higher spiritual leaders start coming together, that this has already started, that some of the higher ups have started the process, and there's a gathering now, a connection happening. So I think that sounds really positive. And they did say that this is not good. It's good in one respect, because it means that we're shifting forward, but it's not good in another respect, like you were referencing to, like you don't want to make them upset enough that they have to do this, but it's actually a good thing to do. That's what I'm getting from you.
Yes, probably to conclude, given time is our enemy, I'm very mindful of the philosophy of sowing a seed. Karen, some of the pieces of the big picture of the puzzle, all they do is turn up initially, and you possibly never see them again. And all they do is plant the seed. and then the next group of people come along and nurture that seedling, and then the next come along, and that unfortunately is the organic process of the cultural practices within the Rangituhaha world, using the environment, reading the environment, and adopting it. Because, simply, we're the last humans, we're the last ones to arrive on this planet. Yet we think we can control the environment, our mother and our father. I mean, I wish them luck with doing that, because it's never, it's been challenged on many, many occasions, and I've never seen a human beat it. So
thank you, Bryce. I don't speak for and on behalf of the tribes or anything, but I am in support of them, and I very much appreciate this offer that you have put out to the people.
Oh, thank you, Karen. If you could pass a humorous comment to them, do it while we're young.
Yes.
Ai, kia ora. Oh, look, I just want to take the opportunity and thank everybody. Ka nui te mihi i ngā mana wahine, mō ngā pātai, me ngā kōrero, me ngā whakaaro. It's been a pleasure for me, and I thank you very much. Ai, kia ora tātou.